Hope. Hope is the thing we are going to embrace today. Can you feel it? Hope is an active verb. It's not a feeling you sit around waiting for. It's a capability you build. And most of us treat hope like the weather. Maybe it'll show up today and maybe it won't. But the science is very clear. Hope is not random. It's something your brain can learn, your habits can train, and your leadership can multiply in other people. Today, we're getting serious about hope, how to activate it when you're tired, frustrated, or flat out stuck, and how leaders use it to create movement when nothing else works. So if you're in a season where the plan blew up, the roadmap changed, or you're just over here quietly thinking, remind me why I care again, stay with me. This is hope as a tool for real life, real leaders, real humans.
Yeah. Human being, forward go on your path inside, Human being, face the sun, take your chances, blow at one. Human being, who you are, meant to be, you're going far. Choose your journey, find your flow, light from inside. Now you know, yeah.
All right. You are listening to Human Being with Dr. Susan, a Sandcastle Radio production on Sandcastle Radio, America's hottest online variety and music station. I am Susan Hendrick, your host, and I am bringing hope today. We're going to talk honestly about what it takes to stay grounded, resilient, and fully human at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Every single day, life throws curveballs that do not care about our plans, our calendars, or our comfort. You already know this. Your inbox knows this. Your blood pressure knows this. We've talked on this show about agility and how agility isn't moving faster. It's about shifting smarter, being curious in the unknown and confident in the storm. But there's a power source underneath all that, because you can be the most agile person on paper with all the tools and frameworks and still feel like you're dragging yourself through wet cement. Agility collapses when hope quietly drains out. So today, instead of starting with strategy, we're going underneath the waterline and talking about the thing that makes every other skill either possible or pointless. Today, we're talking about hope. I mean, the real thing, the kind of hope that changes behavior, unlocks momentum, resets the emotional climate of a team or an individual who's tired, scared, or cynical. But first, let's breathe. Take that fresh, deep breath in. Wherever you are right now, driving, charting, walking the dog, folding laundry, pause just for a second. It's the quickest tool for hope that you have. Inhale slowly through your nose and hold it for a moment. And exhale like you're letting go of the week. Good. Now here's the anchor I want to start with. Hope is a strategy if you know how to operationalize it. Psychologist C.R. Snyder defined hope as three things, and we're going to talk about those three things today. Hope is goals. That's a future you can care about. Pathways, the ability to see routes to get there. and agency, the belief that you can move along those routes. Because those routes are your steps to achieving a better future. Leaders who operationalize hope don't promise certainty. They generate movement. And if you're listening to this show right now, you are not hopeless. You might be exhausted. You might be out of ideas. You might be rowing hard in a boat that feels like it's taking on water, but hopeless? No. You want to know how I know? Because you wouldn't be still investing in your growth and joining me today. You wouldn't still be tuning in if there wasn't at least a pilot light of hope still burning. And today we're going to turn that pilot light up. So let's start with a brave admission. Sometimes it's not that we don't want to hope, we just don't know how anymore. Hope is one of the most misunderstood human forces on the planet. And people dismiss it as soft, as sentimental, something you lean on only when you don't have a strategy. But here's the truth. Hope is a strategy, a measurable, neurological, behavioral strategy that high-performing humans and high-impact leaders leverage to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and change. Hope is not optimism. Hope is not wishing. Hope is not positive thinking. Hope is agency and pathways toward a goal. The belief that you can shape a future and the creativity to figure out how. And here's the kicker. When people lose hope, they don't just feel discouraged. They stop taking purposeful action. They stop imagining a next step. They stop believing in their own adaptability. No team rises higher than its level of hope. No leader scales beyond the capacity of their inner story. And no organizational culture transforms without a future that people can see, feel, and move toward. Hope isn't fluff at the end. Hope is the fuel at the beginning. And leaders are not responsible for eliminating uncertainty. They're responsible for modeling agency, momentum, and grounded belief in a future. Research shows that hopeful leaders think more clearly under pressure. They navigate ambiguity with less reactivity. They inspire discretionary effort. They create psychological safety. They generate trust and followership. Those leaders who are hopeful fuel innovation, expand problem-solving capacity, and make the future feel accessible. People don't follow titles. People follow hope. Hope is the tone setter, the emotional regulator, and the narrative anchor. High hope leaders build high resilience teams. Low hope leaders create cultures of cynicism, caution, and stagnation. This is not personality, this is practice, and we can break it down. Back to Rick Snyder, one of the fathers of hope. Back in the 1980s, psychologist Rick Snyder set the stage for much of today's research about hope. He defined hope as the perceived capability to derive pathways to desired goals and motivate oneself via agency thinking to use those pathways. So unlike optimism, which is simply an expectation for a brighter future, hope is action-oriented and a skill we can learn. We often use the word hope in place of wishing, like you hope it rains today or you hope someone's well. But wishing is passive toward a goal. Hope is about taking action toward it. And at the crux of this action is identifying the steps to achieve a goal and working toward those steps. In a study of hope-based therapy intervention, the researchers had participants write down goals they hoped to meet, followed by several pathways that were possible toward that goal. So you identify where you are currently, and then you generate multiple ways to get where you want to go. This was at Ohio State University. And after 8 weeks, participants reported more life meaning and self-esteem and fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety. All they did was write down goals, followed by several possible pathways. It's important to keep pathways small and manageable. Dr. Matthew Gallagher, professor of clinical and quantitative psychology at the University of Houston, wrote and edited the Oxford Handbook of Hope. He recommends making goals specific and concrete, SMART, as you've heard, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Because hope is about embracing possibility, and it's easier to maintain hope when you feel that your goals are achievable rather than lofty and distant. And remember, this is not a solo sport. Hope requires community. Like Brené Brown said, we don't have to do it alone. We were never meant to. Now, hope by nature is future-focused, but reflecting on the past can also encourage hope down the road, especially if you feel your hopefulness wavering. I often ask people to be their own hope model by reflecting back on a time they've achieved something really difficult in their lives. I want to ask you to do that right now. Think back on a time when you achieved something challenging, when you chose to take action and it made all the difference. Be a hope model. And if you're struggling to find hope, I'm going to give you a tip. This is the easiest tip I've ever tried, and it gives a playful, light-hearted sense of hope to even the most dire of situations. It's a 3-letter word. The word is yet. I can't hold my breath underwater for 2.5 minutes yet. I can't see the outline of the book I want to write yet. I can't find the job that really lines up with what I'm supposed to do on this earth yet. Try adding yet to your next struggle or frustration or deficit and see how that changes your sense of possibility. Back to Rick Snyder, University of Kansas, my and my husband's alma mater, cracked the code on hope decades ago. And his work is still the gold standard today. He found that hope is not an emotion. It's a cognitive process, again, with those 3 components. Do you remember them? Goals, agency, and pathways. Let's talk about goals. Goals aren't just tasks. These are future state anchors. Clear, meaningful, specific North Star targets that matter deeply. Hope begins with a direction and an intention. What are you hoping for? It could be something you're hoping for today, which is to go to Target and get a Christmas ornament. Or it could be something you've been trying to achieve over a lifetime. Hope could be something you want for your children, for yourself, for your community. but make it a goal and make it specific. And then the second of the three elements of hope is agency, the belief that you can make progress. It's the internal voice that says, I can influence this. I am not powerless. I can take the next right step. Agency is self-leadership in its purest form. So goals and agency. What's the third part of hope? Pathways. The creativity to find multiple routes. When one path closes, hopeful people don't conclude, see, it wasn't meant to be. They say, okay, what else? What now? What's another avenue? Hopeful leaders don't need easy paths. They just need options. Dr. Albert Bandura, the father of social psychology, linked hope to self-efficacy, a belief in one's ability to achieve goals. Bandura argued that hope isn't passive wishing, but an active, learned conviction that arises from believing you can influence outcomes. There's somebody on the line right now, Stephen Liu. I am so proud of you. You exemplify hope. You named your goal years before it came true, and you never gave up because you had a goal, you had agency, that belief in yourself that you can make progress, and you found multiple pathways to reach that goal. That's high self-efficacy, which is cultivated through past successes and observing others, like Albert Bandura said, which leads to a more hopeful outlook, more goal setting, and persistence through setbacks. So let's talk about Albert Bandura. Did you know that Albert Bandura and I are linked? He actually spent the night at my house. Tom and I were fortunate to have Albert Bandura and the other three living members of the inaugural class of the Wichita Collaborative Psychology Internship Program, which was founded in 1953. They stayed at our house when we had our 50-year celebration. That collaborative included the University of Kansas School of Medicine and Wichita State University and several other agencies in the Wichita area. And I was responsible for that internship program, coordinating the adjunct faculty and serving as clinical supervisor. That job was the one that I wanted and hadn't gotten the first time when Tom and I moved back to Kansas. In fact, that job went forward without me, and I was at the YMCA teaching swimming to polywogs. But when the time was right, the job opened up, and I was able to secure it. I became the program director for the state of Kansas for 3,000 plus physicians, nurses, social workers, and other community-based mental health service providers. For the United States' oldest APA-approved psychology training consortium. But I didn't get there on the first try. And when I did finally get there, I had no idea what I was doing. But I had hope. And hope consisted of my goal, which was to get that job. My agency, which was the belief that I can make progress toward getting that job. And if I earn it, I will make the absolute most of it and give my very best. And pathways, when it didn't work out the first time, I was patient and I made inroads and I volunteered. And when the time was right, I walked through that door. Hope, goals, agency, and pathways. Now, there's a very human moment we don't talk enough about. The moment when life corners us, fear grips us, and suddenly we start bargaining with God or whatever you believe in. You know the lines. Please let this test come back okay. Please let them wake up. Please let this be fixable. Please just get me through this meeting, this traffic, this season, this storm, this argument. In those moments, we're not actually negotiating. We're not manipulating the universe. We're not making cosmic deals. We are reaching for hope. Because when humans feel powerless, our instinct is to look towards something bigger. Call it God, source, spirit, love, the universe, the collective, meaning, future self, wisdom, whatever vocabulary your soul uses. That bargaining moment is the psyche saying, I'm not ready to give up. I still believe something good is possible, and I'm willing to try. I'm willing to be surprised. That's hope. This is the most ancient primal form of hope, the plea. Hope before strategy, before logic, before science. Hope before any next step. And it's the human heart reaching upward. Hope shows up when the stakes feel highest. Bargaining isn't casual. It's the soul signaling that something matters deeply. It's the "this is sacred" alarm. That sense of bargaining, please let this work out. It snaps us out of numbing and denial. Have you ever been just numb and on autopilot and not realizing how lucky you are to have, to be? Bargaining can snap us out of that fugue when suddenly we care enough to fight for the outcome. And it clarifies our priorities instantly. You only bargain for things you truly love: your people, your health, your purpose, your future, your peace. Calls you back to agency and action. Even though these words sound passive, please let. These moments almost always push us toward movement, the appointment we finally schedule, the conversation we stop postponing, the boundary we finally set, the habit we finally change, the forgiveness we finally attempt. The bargaining becomes a catalyst that softens us. Bargaining with God, or whatever you believe in, cracks open the part of us that pretends we can do everything alone. It brings humility and connection, surrender, and readiness. Reconnects us to a faith in a future we cannot yet see, which is the textbook definition of hope. Hope is about yet. It's not the step after the prayer. The prayer is the hope. In leadership, in health, in parenting, in love, in grief, everyone bargains at some point. Wake-up calls bring us to our knees. Hope helps us stand back up. And when leaders reconnect with that kind of raw, honest hope, the please let kind, they become more human, more humble, and more connected to the people they serve. Because every person at some point has whispered that same quiet prayer in the dark. Nelson Mandela nailed it when he said, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." Hope is an antidote to what's wrong. Across every industry, healthcare, education, business, public service, law, the number one cognitive trap leaders face is deficit focus. You know this well. Your brain constantly scanning for danger, inefficiency, problems, red flags, complaints, gaps, risks. This isn't personal weakness, by the way. It's biology and responsibility and culture and survival. But deficit focus, when unregulated, creates tunnel vision. Hope disrupts that tunnel. Hope lifts my gaze from the immediate threat to the long-term direction, the big prize, from problem to possibility, from fear to forward. Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest minds of our time, used hope as creative problem solving. He was diagnosed with ALS at age 21 and given a few years to live. Hawking could have collapsed into despair, but instead he said these words, 7 words that changed everything. Where there is life, there is hope. And then he rewrote physics, and he lived more than 50 years past his prognosis, traveled the world, revolutionized cosmology, refused to be defined by limitation. Hope for Hawking was not positive thinking. It was the ignition source for his intellect. Hopelessness is rigid and it makes people think in binaries. This will never change. We'll never get along. This is impossible. I can't handle this. Hope opens the mental aperture. What else could be true? What's one small step? Remember, your breath is your greatest engine of hope. Just take a deep breath. It takes no effort to activate that extra oxygen to your brain. Asking yourself, who else can help? What options haven't I explored? What if this challenge is information, not identity? That's cognitive flexibility, the ability to see multiple possibilities, multiple pathways. And it's one of the top predictors of resilience, adaptability, and leadership growth. Hope makes us mentally agile, emotionally grounded, and strategically creative. And we can build the muscle of hope. We can get unstuck. When people feel stuck, agency drops, pathways shrink, creativity collapses, rumination increases, decision fatigue spikes, and self-belief erodes. Hope reverses that shutdown. It reactivates agency, reopens pathways, rebuilds inner permission to act. It's not about feeling good. It's about restoring mobility. Psychological, emotional, relational, behavioral mobility. Hope gets us moving again. Wiggle a toe right now. If you can wiggle a toe, you can create hope. And movement is momentum, and momentum is power. When I look at the patterns in my own life, and in people I coach and in teams I work with, I see 3 recurring ways that hope gets strangled. I call them the 3 F's. Fog, where you can't see the next step. Fatigue, you have no energy for the next step, even if you could see it. And fear, you're convinced the next step will backfire. I want to call these out clearly. Fog, fatigue, and fear. Fog. I don't even know what I want anymore. I don't even know what my goals are. Everything keeps changing, so planning feels pointless. I'm just surviving the day. We mostly spent COVID in a fog. Changed my mind. But those who emerged better, stronger, faster, more hopeful found a way to regain their sight line. When there's no clear there, hope has nowhere to point. Now, a sight line doesn't have to be a glossy 5-year plan or a vision board. Sometimes a hopeful sight line is as simple as, over the next 30 days, I want to feel 10% more myself. That's still hope. And hope can scale. Next is fatigue. I know what I want, I just can't feel my legs. You technically know your priorities. You might even have a strategy deck, but your body and your brain are waving a tiny white flag. Fatigue isn't just, I'm tired. It's experiential bankruptcy, where you've been overdrafting your physical, emotional, and cognitive accounts for too long. In fatigue, hope doesn't feel wrong. It feels expensive, and I can't afford it. You catch yourself dialing it in. Let's just hit the minimum. Let's just get through this quarter. Let's not rock the boat. Your nervous system has shifted into survival mode and imagination feels indulgent. If that's you, please hear this. You don't lack hope because you're lazy or weak. You lack hope because your system is overdrawn. Ambition feels like someone else's life. Let's think about how to make deposits. And finally, fear. What if I blow everything up? Fear comes dressed in smart clothes. I don't want to make the wrong move. What if I leave this job and I regret it? What if I'm not executive material? What if I fail in front of everyone? What if she says no? Fear rarely marches in shouting. It shows up as perfectionism, over prepping, endless research, and constant, I'm just not quite ready yet. And that's where the pottery class paradox walks in and calls nonsense on our perfection addiction. Listen to the pottery class paradox. It's quantity building quality. Here's the story. A ceramics teacher splits the class into two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A is the quantity group. Your grade depends on how many pounds of pots you produce. The more you make, the higher your grade. Group B, your grade depends on producing one single perfect pot. You can theorize, plan, design, but in the end, everything rides on that one masterpiece. At the end of the term, who produces the best pots? Can you guess? Not the perfection group, not the all our eggs in one basket group, the quantity group. Their work ends up more beautiful, more technically sound, more creative. And why? Because while the quality group sat around talking about perfection, overthinking every curve, stuck in analysis paralysis, Googling every technique, the quantity group just kept making pots, bad pots, weird pots, crack pots. And with every flawed attempt, they learned something. Oh, clay behaves like this when it's too wet. That wall collapses if I pull it too thin. This glaze cracks at that temperature. They learned by doing, not by thinking about doing. So the core lesson, when it comes to most skills, volume is what produces excellence, not obsessing over one perfect attempt. This applies to writing, coding, leadership, parenting, and absolutely to learning how to hope again. Do it messy, do it sloppy, do it weird, do it awkward, but just go forward. Because fear tells us it's better to stay in your head where it's safe. It's better to wait until the plan is airtight. It's better to do nothing than produce something flawed. Hope says, make the pot. We will refine as we go. And that takes us to the science side. Let's go there. John Lewis, civil rights icon. He endured beatings, arrests, death threats, and systemic brutality. And yet he said, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day. It's the struggle of a lifetime. He organized with hope. He marched with hope. He fought with hope. Hope wasn't just a feeling. It was his operating system. So what's the science behind hope? Here's a fancy cocktail party word to bust out. Neuroplasticity. You probably heard that word, neuroplasticity, maybe in a TED Talk, in a book, or a podcast. It sounds very technical, but the idea behind it is actually very simple. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to change itself, its structure, its functions, its internal wiring in response to experience. I'm going to tell you a story about my dad later and neuroplasticity. Your brain is not a static circuit board. It's a living ecosystem that creates new synapses, strengthens some connections, and weakens or prunes others. And your brain can reorganize entire regions after injury or major learning. Every thought you repeat, every emotional pattern you rehearse, every behavior you practice becomes part of the architecture of your brain. That's both sobering and wildly hopeful. So, focusing on the good is not fluff. Because most of the changes that matter for our emotional life happen at the level of the synapse, that tiny gap where one neuron passes a message to another. And when two neurons fire together over and over, their connection strengthens. The receiving neuron literally adds more receptors, and your threshold for activating that pathway gets lower. That circuit becomes a fast lane and a circus. That's a cool Freudian slip. It's a circus, but it becomes a fast lane with long-term potentiation. That's the basis of learning and memory. And every time you ruminate on worst case scenarios, your brain gets more efficient at catastrophizing. Don't allow it. Every time you rehearse self-criticism, your brain gets better at tearing you down. There's a bully inside your head. Put it in rehab. Every time you make space for gratitude, meaning, small moments of beauty, your brain gets better at noticing those. That's the idea of focusing on the good, and it can literally shift the architecture of your brain. That's decades of research into neural networks strengthening, weakening, and reconfiguring based on repeated experiences and focused attention. So when you choose to look for the good, especially intentionally, consciously, consistently, you activate neural pathways associated with positive emotion, reward, meaning, and resilience. And over time, your brain begins to prefer these pathways. Optimism starts to feel more natural and automatic. That is the quiet magic of neuroplasticity. Meditation, gratitude, mantra, prayer, visualization. Debs from Sandcastle Radio, she's a pro at these. These are tools for reshaping consciousness. And now, neuroscience can finally explain why these techniques work. Beyond synaptic changes, your brain has more tricks. In some areas, especially an area called the hippocampus, new neurons can actually grow in adulthood. That process is influenced by exercise, environment, and emotional health. There's functional reorganization where the brain reroutes tasks to different regions to support healing or new learning. That's metaplasticity. Bust that one out at the deli. Metaplasticity is the brain changing its own capacity to change. You're greater than any AI agent out there. There's also maladaptive plasticity. You don't want that. Chronic stress, unprocessed trauma, a steady diet of worry and cynicism, that carves deep grooves of anxiety and hypervigilance like lines on a face. The brain is not broken in those moments. It's doing exactly what it's been trained to do, overprotect you. I'm not trying to blame you or ask you to blame yourself for that. I'm inviting you to recognize that if my brain was plastic enough to wire this negative pattern, it's plastic enough to write a new one. There are specific practices that harness neuroplasticity for hope. Gratitude journaling. Grab a pen or put your fingers on a keyboard and write something that you are hopeful for. Mindfulness, meditation, physical exercise, even just moving your ankles in a circle increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports neuron growth and protects existing cells. Quality sleep. We're going to talk about sleep someday. I'm coming for you. Your sleep is one of the most important things you can do to invest in hope. Novel experiences, try something new. Holly Sheeing, someone I dearly adore, she will go to the local produce stand or decorate her front porch in a different way or play differently with her beautiful pups, creating novel experiences to challenge her brain with fresh input, which promotes both structural and functional plasticity. How you like that? And then nourishing food, good brain food, protein, supports your metabolic and your cognitive health and reduces inflammation that gets in the way of good brain functioning. Combine these habits and look out for you. Stillness, attention, compassion, repetition, meditation, prayer, whatever it takes for you to quiet the mind and honor your heart. Like Maya Angelou's, at 7 years old, she was assaulted. She was silent, didn't say a word, didn't speak for 5 whole years, lacking safety, stability, and power. But she rebuilt herself with words and became one of the most commanding agents of words our time has known. Her hope was courageous, honest, and human. And she wrote, "Hope and fear cannot occupy the same space. Invite one to stay." Maya Angelou applied hope through storytelling that healed millions. And you can train your brain to look for the good. That doesn't mean ignoring pain or pretending your challenges don't exist. It means recognizing that your mind can be trained to see the full picture, the hard things and the helpful things. Your inner landscape can evolve. A former colleague of mine, Nicole Skiljo, would rally the troops on our team when she would say, "Where we focus, we win." Paul Kalanithi was a Stanford-trained neurosurgeon, brilliant, poetic, introspective, and on the cusp of a career that would have changed the field. He was married, thriving, respected, and rising. And then at age 36, he was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. Everything stopped. Everything cracked. His identity as a physician dissolved overnight. Suddenly, he was the patient. Now, most people would collapse into grief or rage. Paul didn't deny the pain, he faced it, and he also chose hope, not the Hollywood kind. Hope for him was not about survival, it was about meaning. He realized hope isn't, "I'll live forever." Hope is, "I can still live fully, even now." So he chose to finish his medical training, rebuild his marriage, return to the operating room between chemo rounds, become a father, knowing he might not live to see his daughter grow, and write one of the most profound books I've ever read, When Breath Becomes Air, to help others confront mortality with grace. His daughter was born 8 months before he died. And his final line to her is one of the most hopeful sentences ever written. He said, "When you come to one of the many moments in life where you must give an account of yourself, do not despair." That's hope, not denial, delusion, positive thinking. That's hope as courage, presence, and legacy. Paul Kalanithi became famous not because he lived, but because of how he lived, with fierce, tender, uncompromising hope that transformed millions of readers. Speaking of hope, here's a personal story. It's my hope origin story. Long before I had the degrees, the training, the leadership roles, the frameworks, it was already inside me. A dry plateau on a mountain with a human figure, a mountain rising out of nowhere behind it and in front of it, a sky so bright it felt alive. And next to that figure, Kokopelli, the ancient symbol of music, creativity, mischief, rebirth, and transformation. That was the painting I made after the flood in our house. That painting didn't depict comfort, it depicted aftermath. The flood had come, the world had washed away, yet the figure stood, arms lifted wide open toward the sun, claiming the light that remained. Not because life was easy, but because life was possible. I painted hope before I ever studied it. I painted rebirth before I ever taught it. And I painted the psychology of resilience before I even had the vocabulary to name it. That painting is the visual thesis of today's episode. Hope is a choice, a posture. Think about your posture right now. Bring your chest toward the sun. Make that declaration, not after the storm, but because of it. Kokopelli stands with the figure on the mountain as if to say, yes, create again, rise again, make beauty again. You are not done. Hope is a practice, not a personality. And sometimes we get wake-up calls that take us straight to the knees of hope. There are moments that split a life into before and after. Moments when the story you've been living collides with the truth you've been avoiding. Wake-up calls. Sometimes they crash into your world like a freight train. Sometimes they whisper at first, quiet signals you brush off, until they finally roar so loudly you can't pretend anymore. Now what? Wake-up calls don't exist to punish you. They exist to surface you, to drag you off of autopilot, out of the pattern you've been stuck in. Think about Gabby Giffords. Gabby Giffords embodies hope better than almost anyone I know. In January of 2011, Gabby Giffords was a rising U.S. Congresswoman from Arizona, and she was shot in the head at point blank range during a constituent event. Her injury was catastrophic, and the doctors were blunt. Survival is unlikely. Even if she did live, they said, she might never walk, talk, think, or function again. Her husband, astronaut Mark Kelly, was told to prepare for the worst. Her life, her career, her identity wiped out in an instant. Most people hear that kind of prognosis and collapse inward, but Gabby went the other way. She dug in to something deeper, primal. Call it grit, resilience, faith, stubbornness. Gabby called it hope. Not hopeful thinking, hopeful action. She woke up from her coma with half of her skull missing, unable to speak, unable to move her right side, unable to form sentences or even swallow properly. Her brain was literally torn apart. And yet, every single day she showed up, a half inch of progress, a single syllable, a tiny movement of her foot, then a step, a word, a sentence, a mission. She built her life brick by brick, neuron by neuron, refusing to accept a narrative that had been written for her. The doctor said she'd likely never walk again, never talk again, and now she delivers speeches, walking across stages to advocate for her cause. They said her cognition would flatline, but she's rebuilt her capacity through years of exhausting, unglamorous rehab. And her approach is beautifully simple. She said these 3 lines: every day I try to be a little better. Every day I work. Every day I believe in tomorrow. That's hope. A wake-up call breaks the system, and the story stops making sense. And in that crack, there is space for hope, agency, and pathways. Kevin Hart had an accident in September of 2019 on Mulholland Highway, a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda. He was driving. The crash ripped through the metal and sent the car down an embankment and crushed the life Kevin Hart had been living on autopilot. His spine was shattered, his mobility disappeared, his schedule evaporated, and his sense of invisibility snapped. He was no longer invincible. This was more than physical trauma, it was psychological dislocation. That man who thrived on forward motion, projects, performances, tours, deals, flights, hustle, 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 was now trapped in a hospital bed, unable to walk. For someone whose identity was built on output, capability, and relentless drive, immobilization was earth-shattering. That is the moment most leaders recognize, the identity crisis, when the external scaffolding falls and you're left staring at your unvarnished self. Kevin later admitted he hadn't checked in with himself in years. He was running from something, pushing, proving, performing. But when the noise stopped, he could finally hear his life, the cost of the pace, the widening gap in his marriage, the unsustainable pressure cooker he called success. And that's where hope entered. Strategic, grounded hope. He had two choices: spiral into fear and victimhood, or choose agency and pathways. He chose hope. He committed to rehab with fierce discipline, accepted help, submitted to humility, redirected his ambition toward healing, alignment, and growth, and used gratitude as a neurological anchor. He said, I saw the future version of me, and I decided to crawl toward him. Talk about getting out of a deficit focus. Hope is a discipline, not a feeling. Now, I'm going to tell you my favorite story about hope of all, from chemist to Renaissance man and geography professor. A story about my dad. My dad, Elliot, is a retired chemist. You're going to get to know him, by the way. He's a retired chemist, a great one, not the dabbling with test tubes in the garage kind, the real deal. White lab coat, equations on the board, the smell of solvents in the air, a career built on precision, logic, and the kind of disciplined problem solving the world relies on much more than it realizes. He had spent decades doing the work, experiments, mentoring, breakthroughs, failures, and solutions. And then one day he retired. You know how retirement is supposed to go: golf, naps, maybe a woodshop project. But my dad, no, he wasn't wired for idle. Curiosity was his oxygen. So he walked into the local university at Wilmington U, and he said, I'd like to teach chemistry. And they said, great, we'd love to have you, but we don't have any chemistry courses open. Pause. Most people would have walked out. My dad didn't. They said, well, we could use someone to teach, wait for it, human geography. From chemistry to human geography, the periodic table to political borders, molecular bonds to migration flows. And without hesitation, without fear, without ego, without overthinking, my dad said, sure, I can do that. Just like that. He reinvented himself at an age when most people are shrinking their world. He expanded his. He went home, cracked open textbooks he'd never studied before, dove into maps, patterns of human movement, cultural histories, and global dynamics, and he rewired his mental framework at a time of life when the world tells you it's too late to start anything new. But here's why I bring this story into a conversation about hope. Hope isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like a retired chemist saying yes to something unexpected. Hope is the belief that your next chapter can be bigger than your last, even if the next chapter looks absolutely nothing like the previous one. Hope is the courage to stay curious, the audacity to retool your identity, and the willingness to learn after the world assumes you're done learning. My dad built a second career, not because he needed money or a title or prestige, but because he believed he still had something to give, something human, something useful, something unfinished. He walked into a classroom of students expecting a geography professor and got a scientist with a heart for teaching, a man who could explain tectonic plates and fertile crescents with the same clarity as covalent bonds, a man who turned global systems into stories and who, by accident or by fate, taught human geography with a chemist's precision and a grandfather's warmth. That's the kind of hope that changes a life. I ended up being a student in his class, and I learned more in one weekend than I had in years prior. The kind of hope that reminds us you're allowed to become new at any age. You're allowed to pivot, say yes to what surprises you, believe that your story isn't finished. My dad didn't just teach a course, he modeled what reinvention looks like. He embodied what hope does. And that's why I believe that hope isn't soft. It's a strategy, it's a direction, momentum, leadership, legacy. And then came part two of the reinvention. My dad is a coin collector, the kind who knows the metallurgy, the minting process, the history, the politics, the art, the symbolism, the economics, and the global impact of every coin he touches. And one day at the local club, he volunteered to give a presentation, just one. And he showed up with a talk that was pure interdisciplinary magic. The chemistry of the metals, the geography of the mint location, the socio-political meaning behind the design changes, the economics of circulation, the art history embedded in symbolism, the military alliances hidden in iconography, migration patterns reflected in currency flow, the alchemy of human civilization told through something you have in your pocket. That wasn't just a coin talk for me. It was a masterclass in how everything is connected. And word spread. He gave that talk again at another club. And here we are, 8 years later, this retired chemist who turned into the human geographer, who turned into a global storyteller using coins as portals, was asked to give another talk. Here's the leadership lesson. Hope is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move toward what might be instead of shrinking inside what used to be. My dad could have said, I'm retired. He could have said, I only know chemistry. He could have said, human geography, absolutely not. He could have said, coins are a hobby, not a platform. But hope said, try, say yes, see what unfolds. And do you know that at our Thanksgiving table, he told us he stayed up until 3 a.m. planning his next talk. He was so excited. And because he listened, he created a second moment that was bigger, more joyful, more connected, and more far reaching than even the first. Hope is like that. It doesn't shout, it taps you on the shoulder, people. It hands you a strange new course to teach. And if you're willing, it turns your entire life into something unexpectedly beautiful. So I'm going to leave you with this. After everything we've talked about today, wake-up calls, cracked open hearts, remember that hope is rarely loud. It doesn't kick down your door or flash neon lights. It's subtle and stubborn. It's a whisper that arrives after the storm, not before. We think hope is a feeling, but it's not. Hope is a strategy. Hope is a practice. Hope is the discipline of refusing to give up on the future, your future, our future. Hope is what we become when we stay together. It's not too late. It's never too late. And hope is already on its way. What will you do with the hope in your pocket? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Susan Hendrick, and this is Human Being with Dr. Susan. I will meet you always on the hopeful side of the story. Join me next week at 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on Sandcastle Radio, America's hottest online variety and music station, where we will discuss what it means to be a human being.